Hello and welcome to the Morningstar series Ask the Expert. I'm Emma Wall and I'm joined today by Dominic Johnson, Chairman of the New City Initiative. Hi, Dominic.
Hello.
So I thought today we could talk about Brexit.
Well, what else is there to talk about?
Indeed. There's been a lot of press coverage on what it would mean for the economy, but of course, one of the great assets of the UK is London and the financial district.
Yes.
How would Brexit affect the city?
Well, look, I think you've got to look at sort of short, medium and long-term ramifications of anything as serious as this. In the short term, there will be turmoil. There's no question that Brexit +1, everyone's going to wake up saying, what the hell do we do now? Decisions will be delayed, no one will know about trade agreements, let alone what will happen with sort of short-term contracts and just, do you move office or take on a new hire? So I think short-term, very problematic. Medium-term, more complex, because I think even if we vote to stay in the European Union, you still have an echo of these huge decisions. And you saw that in Canada with the French-Canadian provinces trying to pull out. It actually destroyed Montreal for about 20 years. And you're sort of seeing it in Scotland as well. Even a year later, people are still thinking about the referendum in Scotland. Will it happen again? Was the margin large enough, etc.? So short-term turmoil, medium-term echoes and ramifications either way, actually. But long-term, who knows? The big issue for fund managers or financial services companies is that we're very heavily regulated by the European Union, not in a particularly appropriate way. So everything they do tries to make the bigger and probably reduces ultimate performance. Whereas the UK sort of Anglo-Saxon model is to have a more diverse, sort of more grassroots economy. So long-term, who knows whether the city would be better off? We would certainly be regulated, I think, more appropriately, but in the short term you definitely have turmoil and then medium-term complexities while you reached maybe the promised land, depending on which side you're on.
So is it then just a case of paperwork? Because the overwhelming feeling from the city has been for us to stay in. Certainly, I've had fund managers in this room saying, regardless of what I think for personal reasons, the best thing for my fund would be for us to stay in. Is it simply a case of they don't want to do the paperwork? Or is there reason to suggest that actually we are best governed from the EU?
I don't think we're best governed from the EU in terms of financial services regulation. I think the FCA is probably the most sophisticated and appropriate regulatory body in the world for financial services. That's not to say we're not better off in the EU. The big issue from my point of view as a fund manager is I always thought that the EU was an open market for financial services, and it isn't, which is incredible. You have to register in each country if you want to sell your goods and services, not like in the US or Australia or anywhere else where you have a sort of federal complex. And that's a big problem. So it's very expensive to access the European Union. So many of our fund managers in London don't bother because they just can't, which is extraordinary. So what you get is a peculiar situation where the European system is regulating companies that aren't actually doing any business in Europe per se, if you exclude the UK. And the reason why that's a problem is because London is not just UK equities being managed here, for example. I mean, this is an incredibly vibrant hub of human capital from all over the world. So we're an emerging markets firm, for example, and we're based in London, which is in itself quite extraordinary, but very commonplace in that sense. So the big argument is about what Europe can do to make itself more attractive as a free market. So we would probably, as a community, say that we're better off having a free and open European market than coming out. But the great question you have to ask yourself is that possible? And when is that likely to actually take place? Because at the moment, it's just not there.
And of course, there are a lot of concerns about staying in, as you say, about certain products, for example. There was rumours that investment trusts would suddenly become illegal because of their fund structure, because of things that are going on in the EU. On the flip side of that, there is regulation in the UK that applies only to the UK, such as RDR. We were trailblazing in that, and now France and other European countries are following. So how do you get that balance right between the stuff that's right for the UK and only for the UK, and indeed stuff that's not right for the UK, and saying, actually, no thanks, we don't need that?
Well, this is a great question. Theoretically, good regulation should be right for everywhere. And one of the big issues I think that my industry has faced is that there are cultural differences between the regulators in the UK and in Europe. And I think in Europe, the concept of sort of investing is seen in not such a way, in such a positive way as we see it in London. Capitalism is viewed slightly differently. Their structure is much more revolving around very large banks as intermediaries, whereas in the UK you have financial services companies and so on, and it's much more competitive, and there are far more boutiques. So the approach that the Europeans take, I think, has frustrated many firms based in London. But as I said, I'm not negative, and I'm not a campaigner actually one way or the other. I take quite a balanced view. What I ideally want to see is a true European free market for financial services, because that'd be damn good for Europe. And the one way we're going to survive is A, having a huge pool of good human capital running these sorts of businesses, and B, by having proper capital investment structures that can drive growth. So if anything, the Brexit debate, regardless of the outcome, will hopefully drive better reforms in financial services in Europe, and that's what we would push for, whatever happens.
Dominic, thank you very much.
Great.
This is Emma Wall from Morningstar. Thank you for watching.